Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Anton Warrenchuk in Baltimore. It was a year ago that President Obama tried to secure public and political support for direct military intervention in Syria, but was thwarted in that attempt. Some on the anti-war front say it was the public opposition, while journalists like Seymour Hersh say it was due to warnings from military officials about the possible catastrophe that would result. So then a deal brokered by Russian President Putin to remove Assad's chemical weapons helped Obama save face for the moment. But here we are now, and the U.S. is leading a campaign against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria and supporting a nebulously defined moderate rebel force. So what is Russian interest now in the outcome of this situation? Joining us now to answer this from Moscow is Aleksandr Buzgalin. Aleksandr is a professor of political economy at Moscow State University. He is also editor of the independent democratic left magazine Alternatives, a coordinator of the Russian social movement Alternatives, and author of more than 20 books and hundreds of articles translated into English, German, and many other languages. Thanks for joining us, Aleksandr.
Thank you. Hello.
So let's start off by getting an answer to the question of why does Russia continue to support Assad through all this? What is their interest in him particularly?
So first of all, there is Russia and Russia, and we are talking now about support from Putin and the Russian establishment. The same about U.S. interests in Middle East, in Syria in particular. It's more interest of establishment of the United States. And if we are talking about peoples of Russia and peoples of the USA, this is another question, and we can discuss it later. About interests of Putin and our establishment in this region. First of all, Russia is trying to have status of the country which has influence in not only Russia, inside Russia, but also in some other regions of the world. And Arab space was typically a sphere of interest of Soviet Union, and in some aspects Russia is now trying to continue the same policy. Assad, of course, is not democratic leader at all. He is authoritarian leader, but there is another aspect. If we have, not we, but Syrian people, have another president, another political system, it's 99% that this system will be pro-American, and it will be established by military means. And finally, we can have the same problems as in other countries where war was meant to put democracy, to build so-called democracy. And when democracy is building by military means, by destroying cities, by killing of thousands of citizens, democracy typically is a chaos which continue to reproduce not only anarchy, not only disorder and economic problems, but also reproduce terrorism and instability and also authoritarian policy, internal policy. That's why support of Assad is both geopolitical interest of Russian establishment, and in the same time, this is one of the forms to preserve new military confrontations in terrible forms. Now there is a military confrontation, but to prevent intensification of this confrontation. And in some aspects, this is also interest of Russia. Plus, you must understand that there are a lot of long-term connections with Assad government, economic programs, and all traditions of cooperation with Syria, and not in particular with Assad himself, but with many other institutions in Syria which are interconnected with Assad government. So this is both Russian geopolitical intentions and attempt to support our old cooperation and partly to prevent catastrophe in Syria.
Well, you seem to be making a distinction here between the interests of, let's say, the Russian population and that of the Russian state. I'm curious, what is the domestic debate in Russia on what the state ought to do? I mean, is it about national security issues? Is it about strategic interest abroad?
So we have now deep contradictions. By the way, we had in past and we have now deep contradictions in our internal situation. And partly they're constructive, partly not, partly they're destroying our stability. From one hand, we still have not socially oriented economic policy. We have terrible social differentiation in the country. and corruption, bureaucratic power of oligarchs and top bureaucracy nomenclatura, new nomenclatura in my country, in Russia. From another hand, we have a new wave of real patriotism and so-called patriotism. And the difference is serious because sometimes it's game and attempts of our leaders to show that Russia became now big geopolitical player, a very strong country with huge military forces, with the same influence as the United States or similar influence in the world. And this is not patriotism. This is unfortunately not truth. But some people want to believe in that because during 20 years, Russia was nothing in the international sphere. And in past, when we were citizens of Soviet Union, and this memory is also active even in young generation. In past, Soviet Union was big player, and we were very, how to say, happy, and we respected our state because it was a real important uh, agent institution in world economic, social, political life, and scientific and cultural life. And now some attempts at least to show that we are again important global player. This is partly mean to decrease contradictions inside country. Partly it's based on the real patriotism and real attempts of Russian people to make a new Russia, which will be respectable state, which will be really important part of global peace life, and so on and so forth. But I'm afraid that our government is mainly trying to make show and to realize geopolitical interests of elite, but not really to build new project of Russian participation in world peaceful politics and creation of a real socially oriented democratic system in the world. And this is big question mark and big problem for us, not only for uh, power, but for ordinary people.
I'm curious how much is this, do you think, driven by military or weapons manufacturers in Russia? That is to drive a kind of a more confrontation, aggressive confrontation, perhaps with U.S. interests, like in supporting Kiev or confronting U.S. interests in Syria. How much do you see that the military-industrial complex in Russia fueling this?
So, first of all, military-industrial complex of Soviet Union was completely destroyed, and it was problem because it was destruction also of high tech, of education, of science, including fundamental science. So, destruction of too big army and too big production of weapons was also destruction of big part of civil production in high tech spheres. Now, rebirth of military-industrial complex is partly attempt to create something what we can sell to in other countries, not only oil, gas, but also some military aircrafts, maybe tanks. I don't know. I'm not specialist in this sphere. But this is attempt to sell abroad high-tech production, and this is profitable for the country itself, for people, not only for business and bureaucracy. There is also one aspect which I want to stress. Militarization or so-called militarization of Russia is still very weak. And in comparison with the United States, this is nothing. And our army, our military production, I don't know, maybe it's a few percent in comparison with military industrial complex of the United States and other NATO countries. So that's why we have to make comparison. In comparison with the past, this is growth, but before it was nearly nothing. And for such country as Russia with big territory, such production as we are trying to build in the future will be, I can say, normal according to modern capitalist standards. But from my point of view, even such development is not absolutely necessary, and we can protect our country without militarization through development of high-tech and peaceful technologies and implementation of these technologies in military-industrial complex, but not vice versa. At least this is opinion of my colleagues and my opinion, and we are trying to implement this opinion for to distribute these ideas among specialists, experts, and ordinary Russians.
Okay, and do you think that the civil war in Ukraine has played a role at all in sort of influencing some of the geopolitical interests or the geopolitical actions of the Russian state, for example, in Syria?
So confrontation in Ukraine is really multi-space problem. There are a lot of different aspects. One of these aspects is appearance of new tendencies inside Russia. One of these tendencies I want to stress, this is real patriotism. And in Russia we have millions of people, I want to stress, not a few, but millions of people who really want to protect the people in the east, south of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Lugansk, from aggressive military actions of Kiev authorities. And this is, I think, positive intention. This is not nationalism. And now some people in Russia started to think about motherland, about social interests, not only about private economic market money interests, not only about increasing of his personal wealth or property, but also about social status of the country, of peoples of Russia, and so on and so forth. And this is positive. But there is also a negative trend. And this negative trend is interconnected with growth of Russian nationalism, sometimes even great power chauvinism in the country, attempts to show that Russia is strong military, has strong military force, strong army, and this is our main, I don't know how to say, positive feature in world politics. I think this is not main decision of Russia. We have fantastic cultural results. We had fantastic cultural, social, scientific results in the past, and we can have them in the future. But this is reality, and this so-called patriotism and real patriotism are two hands of one situation. And in many aspects, both aspects are interconnected with very aggressive behavior of the US establishment, NATO establishment, European Union establishment in Ukraine and in relation to Russia. In some aspects, your officials are trying to play a role of strong teacher who will punish bad student, and Russian people are absolutely disagree with such position. And such behavior of US leaders, President, other important persons in the United States and NATO, such behavior creates a very negative reaction on the US in general in the country. And this is provocation for Russian nationalism and expansionism inside Russia. That's why this is very interconnected with the US government policy, with the policy of NATO leaders. This is two sides of one medal.
Okay, Aleksandr Buzgalin coming to us from Moscow. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you. I'm glad to do it every time.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.